Good morning, America. How are ya? Monday Morning Rail. Hi, I'm Denny Jelsma, and I'm at the world famous Jacksonville Terminal Railroad Museum in beautiful Jacksonville, Florida, where the sun always shines. Today is Monday, and you know what we do on Monday? You guessed it, we do show and tell. And show and tell is always brought to you by Jelsma Graphics, the people that make all the embroidered railroad clothing. We make hats, jackets, shirts, club shirts. Go to jelsma.com. That's Jelsma. And in 2 weeks, Jelsma Graphics is going to be in West Springfield, Massachusetts. The Big E, the best and the biggest train show in America. And we have a booth there. We've been doing that show for 20 some years. Same spot. So stop by and say hi to us. And if you do, we'll give you a free Ken Patterson What's Neat This Week hat. So make sure that you go to the Jelsma Graphics booth and get a free hat. Come by and say hi to us. And with all that being said, show and tell is going to start right now. It's Monday morning and show and tell is starting right now, and we do have a very exciting show. And we have with us one of our club members, Cardinal Phil, better known as Phil, and he's an avid FEC, and he is a vice chairman of the Jacksonville Terminal Railroad Museum. So I'm proud to have this executive standing next to me, and he has a long history of railroading in his family, and so we're glad to have Cardinal Phil. So, Phil, welcome to Show and Tell.
Oh, thank you, Denny. I watch every week, and it always prompts more questions. And you know, you mentioned modeling the Florida East Coast, which I do. So when you first begin, you kind of model certain trains of certain eras, and being an FEC guy, so I have a consist made up of all FEC cars. But then when you start studying the prototypes, you realize, well, there's a lot of railroads that make up these trains and different consists. So as you develop, go a little deeper into modeling, you want to have those different roads and consists. So tell us a little bit about, let's say, like a train like the Champion that went from New York to Miami. Tell me about the different railroads and the consists.
Well, the Champion was such a very popular train that ran from Miami to New York City, and it ran over the Florida East Coast. It was about 350 some miles in Florida. Then they handed it over to the Atlantic coastline, and then it got into Richmond and went on the RF&P Richmond. And went to Washington, D.C., and then at Washington, D.C., it went on to Pennsylvania. And so, we as modelers, we kind of tend to, like you like to run your Florida East Coast trains. Well, when you would watch videos, you would see all of these different cars. You'd see the Pennsylvania, you'd see the RF&P, Atlantic Coast, and so you'd see all these different cars. And sometimes as modelers we'll say, well, yeah, I'm not a Pennsy guy. Well, but that Pennsy car showed up in on the the Champion, and so it just made up of the all the different. There wasn't one railroad that ran
Right.
All the way.
And you can see here we've got everybody recognizes the purple of Atlantic coastline. Frisco car, RF&P. Pennsylvania.
And what I want to say is certain railroads on certain trains were very strict with their colors. For an example, if it was on the Broadway Limited that went from New York to Chicago, that train was a pure all Pennsy maroon color. And other Pennsy trains, and if there was a foreign car that would run, and for an example, the Pennsylvania would run a car out west, and that western car had to be painted maroon, and so like for an example, this Pennsylvania car here is silver. Well, this car ran on the Seaboard, and Seaboard wanted all of their cars to look all stainless steel silver, and so Penske had some stainless steels, and they just put Penske across the board, and depending upon the train. And for another example is the Illinois Central. The Illinois Central was very, very pure when they had their chocolate colored Illinois Central cars. And the Central of Georgia, you would see Central of Georgia on there. You'd see Florida East Coast in Illinois Central colors because that's the railroad demanded that.
Well, what about crews as an example? Let's say we had multiple railroads. We had, let's say, Atlanta, or multiple dining cars even, maybe, like on the expanded Champion. If it was the high season and they had to put more cars on, you had an FEC diner and an ACL diner. How did that work with the crews?
Well, let's start out with the railroad, the conductor and the brakeman, and that was just talking about the railroad crews. A crew would get on at Miami and run to Jacksonville, and that would be an FEC crew. And so four that was really, kind of operating the train. Then the Atlantic Coast Line would take their crew and run it into the Carolinas, and they would change crews. Now, let's take, for an example, a sleeping car, which was ran by the Pullman. We all heard of, Pullman. Well, the Pullman Porter, they had their whole, that was ran by the Pullman, and the Pullman owned the car. And so in 1948, the government said that was antitrust, and they broke it up. But the Pullman used to advertise that they had the largest hotel in the world, because every night there would be 100 to 150,000 rooms that would be rented. Now, those crews were all based in certain areas. For an example, here in Jacksonville, we had a Pullman crew, and they would come, they'd leave Jacksonville, hop on the train, and go to New York. They would turn that train, they'd go back to Jacksonville, to Miami, and then they'd come back to Jacksonville. And different crews, depending upon where the train actually went. For an example, if went to the Midwest, they may have a Chicago Pullman crew. And then, for an example, they had a Pullman. They had a Pullman conductor, and he was the boss of all of the Pullman people. And so, and he was always a white guy, and most of the time, the actual workers of that, they were African American. And so, but they had different bases. Now, dining cars, it was depending upon, here again, let's just take for the Florida East Coast. The Florida East Coast had their own dining crew, and they would run it from Miami, to Jacksonville, and they would have they would change crews. The car would be the same, and it'd still say Florida East Coast, and it would go, up north.
Okay. Well, we covered a lot of ground on that today with just different concests and crews. So maybe next time we can put together an actual consist and delve into maybe haulage and leasing and things like that.
Well, use that haulage again. I get a kick out of that. But when we run passenger trains as modelers, we should, in my opinion, if you like, if you would say a Pennsylvania and you want an old Pennsylvania, that's fine. That's your train. You can do whatever. But in reality, you saw different railroads mixed in, and they would call that foreign power. And the same thing down here in Florida. You watch some of the old videos, very common that you would see FEC, you would see Great Northern, you'd see Union Pacific, and well, those cars would end up going, to the west. A perfect example was on the 20th century. The 20th century ran from New York to Chicago, but depending upon the year, it always had a Los Angeles car, and it was the Santa Fe Pine Series Pullman. And so you could get on a train in New York City, and you don't have to change trains or anything, or cars, and it went all the way to LA. The 20th century brought it to Chicago. They switched it, put it on the Santa Fe, and so that happened all over the United States. So that's why you see so many different cars in videos and that. So you have any other questions, Cardinal Phil?
No, I think for today that's the way it is, I believe.
And that is the way it is at the world famous Jacksonville Terminal Railroad Museum in beautiful Jacksonville, Florida, where running trains is an absolute pleasure in peace and harmony and climate control comfort.